So our first speaker today is Rob Nunn. Rob is the Gasogene of the Parallel Case of St. Louis, Lamplighters of the Priory Teachers Association, Program Chair of the Beacon Society, and member of other Sherlockian groups. He is the recipient of the Beacon Award for his annual Sherlock Holmes unit he teaches to 5th grade students, author of The Criminal Mastermind of Baker Street, and co-editor of the forthcoming The Finest Assorted Collection. His writings have also been published in the BSI Professional Series book, Education Never Ends, the Sherlock Holmes Journal, the Watsonian, and other anthologies. Rob lives in Edwardsville, Illinois with his wife and daughter, and his thoughts on Sherlockiana can be found on his blog, Interesting Though Elementary. Rob's talk is entitled, A Friend of Mr. Sherlock Holmes is Always Welcome. How is being a Sherlockian like teaching elementary school? Rob will share his thoughts on the similarities between education and this interest of ours. Rob.
Thanks, Eleanor. All right, I'm going to share my screen and just kind of try to walk through or talk as I walk through this, because not only is this my first Zoom presentation, but it's my first Sherlockian presentation ever. So I'm going to apologize in advance for any fumbling that I do. But so Sherlockians come in all ages, shapes, sizes, and backgrounds. But other than the love of a good story, we all have another thing in common. At some point in time, we were all kids that went to school. There we go. For the past 7 years, I've taught a 2-week language arts unit on Sherlock Holmes to my 5th graders. Over these 10 days, we read abridged versions of The Blue Carbuncle, The Red-Headed League, The Speckled Band, Copper Beeches, and A Scandal in Bohemia. And from these stories, students learn about the story elements, such as plot, the role of a narrator, rise in action, setting, and they also create their own mystery stories and put on Sherlock Holmes plays for other classes. It is definitely a jam-packed 2 weeks. But these 10 and 11-year-olds don't start out knowing a ton about Sherlock Holmes. Sure, they know that I'm a fan and they recognize a deerstalker, but these kids aren't watching BBC Sherlock or reading The Hound of the Baskervilles in their free time. If I'm lucky, they recognize Elementary as a show their parents watch, or they make a connection that Sherlock Holmes has been played by Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Magneto, and now Superman in my introductory PowerPoint. I expect a lot of kids this year to be familiar with Enola Holmes, and last year, plenty of them knew about this gem. So kids do have some background knowledge about Sherlock Holmes by 5th grade. I've been lucky enough to have a few kids each year really get into reading the canonical stories, or they join the Junior Sherlockian Society, or they pick up some of the younger pastiches. And last year I had a student get a Sherlock Holmes story published in the Irregular Adventures of Sherlock Holmes from Belanger Books, and another student won 2nd place in the Joel Center essay contest sponsored by the Beacon Society. But whether kids are penning award-winning essays or they're arguing with each other about who really won between Holmes and Irene Adler, every kid that gets engaged somehow with Sherlock Holmes is a win for me, because every new exposure to Sherlock Holmes is a possible future Sherlockian. And I found that plenty of tactics from my classroom can be used in encouraging new fans to stick around and stay active in this hobby of ours. In 16 years of teaching elementary school, one of the most important lessons I've learned is that when it comes to getting kids excited about reading, I have to start from where they are as readers and not where I want or expect them to be. Every year I have kids all over the place with their interest and ability levels in reading. And using strategies that have been developed by educators that are much smarter than me, I'm consistently able to say that by the end of every year, every kid enjoys reading more than they did when the year started. And they're also a better reader no matter how much they enjoyed it when the year began. So let's apply some of these tried and true methods to our hobby of Sherlockiana. What do we do when someone has expressed an interest in Sherlock Holmes? How do we nurture that interest and fan that spark into a flame? Well, I'm sure we've all had someone show the slightest interest in something that we're passionate about. And how do we respond? If you're anything like me, you've done some of the following. A, you load them up with 10 books, 6 movies, 3 television series, and the entire wiki of our fandom, and our friend is so overwhelmed, they never mention that interest to us again. B, you could say something along the lines of, oh, that's okay, but what you really need to read or watch or do is, and our friend now views this hobby as something that is far too highfalutin for them to be a part of. C, we make sure we keep bringing up that interest with our friends over and over again, almost like a kid in the back seat, asking when we'll get there. Hey, are you a fan yet? Are you a fan yet? Are you a fan yet? I am guilty of all of these in the classroom and in Sherlockiana. As a teacher, I know that I have to ease many readers into the amazing titles out there waiting for them, and without scaring off any emergent readers in my class. And you got to ease new Sherlockians in just as well. So my first tip is no judgment. Any interest a student has in reading is a valid interest. Sure, I get tired of seeing kids with the same graphic novels or Diary of a Wimpy Kid books over and over again, but I have to remember, at least they have a book in their hand. As an educator, it's my job to broaden their horizons. There is a world full of great literature out there waiting for them. But if I dismiss the things that they like, they're probably going to dismiss the things that I recommend to them. So even though not every student is going to have a refined palate when it comes to literature, I'm encouraging with what they want to read. Same rule applies for Sherlockians. Millie Bobby Brown just brought Sherlock Holmes front and center to a lot of young folk and old folk like me. Should we shake our heads because the canonical Holmes didn't really have a sister or Henry Cavill was too handsome? Nope. These people have Sherlock Holmes in front of them. Helping kids grow as readers works when I'm there to guide, not lecture my students on what they should enjoy. Instead of directing students to the next book they should read, I found becoming more of a companion on their reading journey and a cheerleader in their interest creates intrinsic motivation to the students that's priceless. I don't know a single Sherlockian I agree with 100% when it comes to our rankings of the stories, opinions on adaptations, or levels of interest in all these things. So why would we expect new Sherlockians to conform 100% to our interests? We've got to welcome them in and embrace the commonalities we have. Maybe you can pick something up from their interests, and maybe they can learn a thing or two from you. So my next tip is guided choice. The most important part of my reading curriculum is giving students choice. Giving kids a choice in what they read creates a sense of ownership that can't be taught. And every book they're into, no matter the topic, is something I'm happy to talk to them about. Once kids know you're interested in hearing what they think about a topic, they are much more interested in hearing what you think about other things. And we can do the same thing with new Sherlockians. Oh, you like this? Well, do you know that that's based off of a book? Or, I haven't seen that yet. Sounds like it might be worth checking out. Even if it's not, it won't kill us to say that. I guarantee all of us here today received grace from other folks in this hobby. And now it's our turn to welcome people in, no matter which door they come through. And that leads to fostering growth. Along the same lines of the last strategy is to help foster growth of the reader. In education, there's a theory called reading ladders. It's defined as a series or set of books that are related in some way and demonstrate a gradual development from simple to more complex. With curated book suggestions and a guiding hand, we as educators move students from where they are to where we want them to be. And why not use this for someone who's shown an interest in Sherlock Holmes? Earlier, I talked about the pitfall of dumping a ton of recommendations on a newbie, but a few good suggestions can still go a long way. The important part about building ladders is listening to where people are. Everyone who loves elementary might not be someone who wants to sit down and watch all the Basil Rathbone films yet. There are so many different ways to enjoy Sherlockiana that it's not hard to find similar forms of the stories for every type of fan. And in real life, ladders are linear, but in this analogy, they can radiate out in many different directions based on the person and their interest. So instead of a Sherlockian working up a ladder to some ultimate devotee nirvana, we can actually imagine them in the middle of their own little web of interconnected interests. And with some help from us, maybe that web can have 1,000 radiations and they know, well, every quiver of each of them. But there's some students who just want to read, and the teacher's standing in their way with constant worksheets, projects, comprehension checks, blah, blah, blah. All of this takes away from the pure joy of just reading a good story. Probably one of the greatest joys in my work is getting kids so engrossed in a book they hate to put it down, because that is just pure bliss. In our hobby, the canon's what connects us all. The majority of new Sherlockians aren't going to start out there nowadays, though. But if and when they do discover those 60 magnificent tales, we should let them enjoy the stories. Discussions are great, but the first time we read The Speckled Band, did we care that there was no such thing as a swamp adder? No, it's just a hell of a good story. Picking apart plot holes and devising theories will probably come in time for our new fans, but let's just live vicariously when someone gets to read those stories for the first time. And in the same vein as getting out of the way, I think it's important to have students be active in their own learning. We can all remember teachers who worked off the mentality of, I talk, you listen, I teach, you learn. But when students are passive in their education, information is not going to be retained. I can't just stand up in front of the class and deliver facts to them and expect them to stick. Kids have to have an active role in their education. Engaging students by asking for opinions, getting them to find my mistakes, turning them on to the creative process are just a few ways that students can participate in instruction. And it's up to us to get new Sherlockians to be active as well. It can be intimidating to think that everyone else in this hobby is so much smarter than you or knows the stories so much better than you do. We have to remember that people come to Sherlockiana for fun and amusement. It's easy to get on a roll with our information and theories, but sometimes you have to read the room, and if you've left people behind, you got to pump the brakes. I can't tell you how many times I've finished modeling a math problem on the board thinking I have just dropped some knowledge and expanded minds, and then I turn around and I see a room full of glazed over eyes. I'd lost them, and it's time for me to circle around and get those kids back on board. Because students aren't just empty vessels waiting to be filled by a teacher's knowledge, and new Sherlockians aren't just recruits for us to preach at. Fostering a good back and forth between all knowledge levels can lead to some wonderful discussions. Now, this next tip of building a community might not apply to everyone, but I still think it's worth saying. Classroom management is an important part of any teacher's job. And for those of us who are in leadership positions within Sherlockian groups, I found some tricks from the teacher's toolbox can be useful here as well. It's important to build a community in a classroom, and that community should accept every student and encourage them no matter where they are on their learning journey. And within that community should be a motivational and a welcoming mentality. If your students aren't motivated or don't feel welcome, you're going to be doomed. Same thing goes for societies. I've been the new kid walking into an established group of Sherlockians plenty of times. Luckily, I've had many, many people who welcome me and integrate me into conversations and groups. Just like as a teacher, I should be accepting of every student no matter where they are. I should also be accepting of people who are interested in the same stories as me as I'm a Sherlockian. Inviting people to sit by you at a meeting, tagging them with an interesting article on social media, or any way to extend that hand of friendship is a way to show what a great group of people Sherlockians can be. And everyone's going to bring something new to the table. I'm the Gasogene of my local scion, the parallel case of St. Louis, and I love the setup our founder, Joe Eckrich, came up with. It's more of a book club format where everyone's encouraged to participate. Sure, we welcome papers and talks, but what we really want is a conversation. This allows everyone to be engaged and take on roles and responsibilities that they're comfortable with. We've had so many different areas of expertise shared in our discussions that would have been missed if we hadn't openly welcomed and encouraged people to share their thoughts. And from that small way of including people, members have helped coordinate conferences, given talks, written blog posts, swapped books, and have found all kinds of other ways to strengthen the community feel of our group. And if new people aren't comfortable speaking in front of a group yet, it's okay for them to be quiet. As long as they don't run out of the meeting crying, I'm assuming they had a good time. Because Sherlockiana is all about the friendships. Sure, we love a good talk or a quiz, but we keep coming back to these events and gatherings because of the camaraderie. When the world went all awry this March, we still found a way to meet. It didn't take us long to realize that, yeah, we love the stories, but we need Sherlockians. Just like friendship is the theme throughout the canon, it's a theme throughout the century of this hobby as well. Students learn better when they feel safe and appreciated. And the most active Sherlockians are probably the ones with the strongest social bonds. In this time of COVID and beyond, it's important to remember that Sherlockian friendship isn't something that always happens naturally. Sometimes it's something that we have to work for and foster. But whether you're running a society meeting or any other type of group, this final teaching practice is good for all of us. Reflecting and analyzing classroom practices is a must for any educator. I don't want to be that teacher who's using the same old musty lesson plans from 10 or 15 years ago. We all had a few of those. We have had so many different areas. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn my page. Teachers should constantly be asking themselves, is how I'm teaching reinforcing what is important, or am I doing this because it's the way it's always been done? Now, don't get me wrong. Traditional Sherlockiana is a very important thing. And I'm not saying we should throw out the 221B sonnet or anything like that, because I'm not crazy. But do we expect Sherlockians to act and behave the same way they did in the 90s or in the 60s or in the 1930s? I think we can all look back on the history of any cultural touchstone and see how this has evolved over the years. because I don't want to be someone who's not open to a new experience because it was different from the way things have always been done before. And sometimes a little kind prodding from an outside source can keep us from getting stuck in a rut, because Sherlockiana is always moving forward. So to wrap things up, as a teacher, it's important ultimately that the education belongs to the students. Students' education doesn't belong to me, their school, or anyone else, and Sherlock Holmes belongs to Sherlockians, both old and new. Sherlockiana isn't some stubborn institution of rigidity. We are a living, breathing organism that continues to welcome new members year after year. So I hope that these 7 teaching strategies can help new fans and devotees enjoy the wonderful camaraderie that comes along with being a Sherlockian. Welcoming new fans from where they are, being there to help when needed, or just cheering them on as they dive headfirst into our hobby. Growing our community, encouraging new folks to be active, and reflecting on how and why we do things are just a few practices that will help keep the memory of the master green. In the end, all we can do is plant the seeds and hope that they take root. Whether it's a student heading off to middle school after a year with me, or a new Sherlockian testing out the waters of this interest of ours, we can only hope that they answer the call when they hear the game is afoot. I'll stop my share. All right. All right, so Q&A. Oh, when my first one's from Paul Miller, I know I'm up for something.
So Paul Miller asks, Rob, as a teacher, how do you deal with students breaking into your classroom to sneak a peek at half a chapter of Thucydides?
Well, I would check to see if there are pyramid-shaped mounds of clay on the classroom, and if assistants had any previous relationships with students.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that talk. So we have time for more questions. If there are questions, you can throw them in the Q&A box. You can put them in the chat. I'm getting a lot of praise in the chat. I hope you're looking at that.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
I'm going to print that out and read it before bedtime every night.
Wish there were more of you. Tim Johnson asks, Rob, how has Holmes helped you teaching in the pandemic?
Oh, interesting. Well, so I typically teach my Sherlock Holmes unit in November. And I think any educator will tell you that this year is just harder than any other year we've ever had. I am teaching in person. The lady that teaches next to me is teaching remote. I have friends that are doing hybrid. No matter where we are, it's just so hard. So for me personally, having that high point in my year coming up next month is, man, such a shining light at the end of the tunnel to get to.
David Harnoy asks, has any story leapt out as a particular favorite among your students?
So I always get the kids that are ambitious after we do the short stories, because at 5th grade, it's tough to do a long novel for everybody. But the ambitious ones that are after that jump into The Hound of the Baskervilles, and they love it. I've got it in a bunch of different versions. The original print, which is actually written at about a high school age level, so I don't push that one too much. There's an abridged version written for 4th to 6th grade kids. There's a couple graphic novel versions. So those are the ones that I kind of put in kids' hands. As for short stories, the kids love A Scandal in Bohemia, because I purposely saved that one for last, because it's such a good, first of all, they love the fact that Holmes essentially loses or doesn't, achieve his goal, and it opens up a great debate over who actually won there. And another favorite is Blue Carbuncle, because there's a good, first of all, it's a fun story that, there's really no danger involved in that one. And it opens itself up for a good classroom debate at the end for should Holmes have let Ryder go or not. I love getting.
What about the goose, Rob? What about the goose?
Well, I don't know. A lot of them are eating a goose for dinner is so foreign to them. If it were in a turkey, they'd get it.
Haley asks, Rob, I've got a 1st grader. Do you have any recommendations for first stories or activities for early readers?
That's It's a tough one because I teach fifth grade. My wife teaches first grade, and we may as well go to two different planets every day. She comes home and talks about having to tie kids' shoes, and I tell her I have to change seating arrangements because of ex-boyfriends and girlfriends. So that's a pretty big jump. The Blue Carbuncle is always probably a good introductory one, as is Red-Headed League. Like, you can't go wrong with those two, especially for those early ages, but definitely find one at a reading level of your kid, because the canonical stories are not written at an elementary reading level.
Joanna asks, do you have any pushback or concerns from parents regarding some of the Holmes material? Conversely, how do you cope with the racism/sexism sometimes in view?
Oh, man, that is a good one. I purposely pick stories that kind of avoid that stuff. If anybody knows Shannon Carlisle, who's a fourth grade teacher in Tennessee, she's a great Sherlockian educator as well. She has a rule: no blood, no guts, and no gore, I think it is. And that's a good rule to live by. That takes out quite a few stories. It is, so I don't get a lot of stuff on the violence or the murder, because when I do teach the Silver Blaze, I mean, that's really the only one with a murder, and it's done in self-defense by a horse. So they can't really get too mad at that. And the racism and sexism, I really, really purposely stay away
from. Ruth is asking, how much control do you get over classroom content? Over here in England, we have a national curriculum which all teachers must follow. How does it work where you are?
That's going to be, so in America, that's very different from state to state, and even district to district. So we have to teach certain teach certain standards, but our methodology is open to us for what reading materials we use in my district. But math, I have to teach a certain lesson specifically every day. But when it comes to language arts, I'm just told I have to teach certain standards, and it's up to me to choose how that's done.
Richard Svam asks, do you use the canon for fifth graders? Sounds like you do.
Yeah, only my really high ones. I have copies of it in my library, and if the kids want to pick it up, I'm more than welcome to, it's there for them, but that's not a teaching material that I use because it's going to be too high for 90% of the kids.
Got it. Mike Mixwigan asks, do kids read Encyclopedia Brown anymore? That was my gateway drug to Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, pharmacists and their drugs, right? So I've got a few of them in my classroom library for kids that are interested, but that has not been a book that publishers have tried to keep current. It is very, very dated. So unless kids want to read things that their parents read, it doesn't get picked up. Same thing goes for the Hardy Boys. They're there if people want them, but they're not current.
Lou Lewis and Don Jekyll are both asking, do you supplement with movies or videos in class, like The Great Mouse Detective?
Oh, yeah. Yes, The Great Mouse Detective is the crowning jewel. The last day, after the kids have put on their plays and they've done, the plays take a good week to get ready and everything. And afterwards I say, okay, you've done all the hard work, but we have one more adaptation to talk about. And then I pull up The Great Mouse Detective on Disney, and it's just a nice sigh of relief after they think I'm going to hit them with another big project. They get to sit and watch a Disney movie for 90 minutes. And last year, actually, I used clips from the Granada series here and there for certain things. And I actually had the kids beg me to watch The Speckled Band last year because I used the clip of Roy Lott and the Bending the Poker. And they wanted to watch the whole thing. And you got to give the people what they want sometimes.
Beth Gallego is suggesting for young kids, try Hamster Holmes, a ready-to-read series by Alvin Sidar.
Yeah, there are a lot of really good younger takes on the mystery genre with nods to Sherlock Holmes, but for the actual canon, I don't know if there's much.
Hugh Ashton's Sherlock Ferret, also an option. Tom Ferris is asking, can parents opt out their child?
I'm not opposed to it. I've never had a parent specifically asked to opt out of something like that. So I don't know. That would be a discussion I'd have with them if they asked, though.
Robin's asking, how do you deal with the drug references within the canon? Does this lead to a classroom debate about drugs in general?
That's another one of those topics that I just avoid. I used to say avoid like the plague, but in the year 2020, I'm trying to. Yeah, because so much of the material is not adapt or appropriate for 10 and 11-year-olds. But I mean, there's some really good adventure stories, and that's what I get to them.
Last remark is just John Gann saying, so I would think Cardboard Box is out, but have any of them read it on their own and been freaked out?
Not to my knowledge, and the kids that would read that may also be the ones that are going home and watching the Saw movies on the weekends. So I don't have control over what they watch on Netflix.
True. Marcia asks, have you used or suggested Eve Titus Basil books after showing the Great Mouse Detectives?
I do have the first 3 Eve Titus books in my library, so I'm constantly given what's called book commercials, like, hey, if you like this, you may like this. So after the Great Mouse Detective movie, I kind of point out, hey, this is here, this is here. When Enola Holmes came out, I not so subtly printed off bookmarks and put all the Enola Holmes books up on the front tray of my whiteboard, just so kids would see them.
Do the students read any Sherlockian comic books?
Yeah, there is a great series called On the Case with Holmes and Watson. I actually use that for Copper Beaches, just so we can talk about the difference between how a story is told in text versus graphic novels. And then there's a handful of, I think there's 12 or 15 issues of those that are very story appropriate and then are told in an engaging way. It's nice they introduce the characters right up front, and it's right at a 4th to 6th grade reading level. On the Case with Holmes and Watson, those are really good.
How much do you wind up discussing the history and culture of the times, or do you treat them more as eternal adventure stories?
No, I think it's really important to also note that when you're reading something that's not current, it comes from a specific point in time. I have specific lessons where we talk about the Strand magazine and just how important magazines and short stories were 130 years ago. And a lot of kids make the connection that short stories are a lot like how they treat YouTube videos. They don't take a ton of time, and you can watch them. Sometimes they connect to each other, sometimes they don't. And we talk about just how entertainment was different. You've got to define what a hansom cab is, because they think it's just a really good looking person driving a car. So a lot of those things need definition, and it's very much you got to put it in historical context.
John Bonnell asks, have you seen and would you or have you used the Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century cartoon?
I don't know if I've ever actually seen a full episode of that.
It's so good.
I know.
That's what I watched.
It looks like a lot of fun, but
bonkers. Yeah, that's what I watched when I was 10. That was one of my gateways in. Wacky. Out on DVD these days.
To Sherlockiana until my early 20s, so I missed out on all the kids stuff.
Crazy. Any last questions from the gaggle? I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Right.
Oh, we have one more. Just kidding. Very niche reference. But have you ever watched the 3 episodes of Puppet Holmes? You think children would like that?
Okay. I've never watched them, but I found clips of them or pictures of them, and so I have an introductory PowerPoint that really kind of introduces Sherlock Holmes, and it talks about all the different ways that his stories have been done. Obviously, books and TV shows and movies, but I also throw up the Muppet Sherlock Holmes comic book. And then at the end, I'll say, and he's even been turned into a puppet show in Asia. And I'll put that up. And every single year, the kids just lose their minds when they see that. And they think that is just the craziest thing they've ever seen.
One more. What is the funniest comment a student has made in reaction to Sherlock and the stories?
I did one time have a fifth grader go, man, Irene Adler's a badass, which I totally agree with, but then you got to like, hey, no, cool it.
Don't say ass.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you so much.